Welcome to another edition of the Crossroads Suncast. Kentucky's primary election is in the books, one that had national implications on a number of different races. In this special edition, political pundit and professor of history at Murray State University, Brian Clardy, joined me just hours after races became final to break down all the results. Hello, everyone. I'm Todd Faulkner, joined by Dr. Brian Clardy, history professor at Murray State University, and we're continuing the conversation tonight on two things we are very passionate about discussing, and that is politics. Of course, we're talking about the Kentucky Republican primary. So, Dr. Clardy, thank you for being here. Let's just jump right in. The U.S. Senate race to fill retiring Senator Mitch McConnell's seat. Congressman Andy Barr, endorsed by President Trump, that's an endorsement that he touted over and over again, handily beat Daniel Cameron. Your take on that race?
Well, the president clearly showed that he is his party's leader. This is the party of Donald Trump, no question about it. The day that the president endorsed Andy Barr, it blew me away. And then on top of that, Nate Morris withdrew from the race and endorsed Andy Barr. I knew that Daniel Cameron at that moment was finished in the primary. And so now we have Andy Barr as the newly minted Republican nominee for the U.S. Senate. I listened to his victory speech tonight, and it seems as though he's going to nationalize this race. He's going to try to make Charles Booker to be the Zoran Mondami of Kentucky. He's going to paint him as a liberal socialist. He's going to paint him as an extremist, and he's already made that very clear that that's what his intentions are. And so Barr is probably going to be the favorite in this election, and Charles Booker has a lot of work to do. He expects to win in November.
Yeah, an uphill battle. Let's talk about Charles Booker. Really, it came down to, and it was a crowded field, but it really came down to Charles Booker and Amy McGrath. And both have run Senate campaigns and both have lost Senate campaigns. But Charles Booker was able to pull off a win over McGrath. What do you make of that at the end of the day?
Well, it was very interesting. 6 years ago, we were in a totally different place. The election between McGrath and Booker in the Senate race in 2020, we didn't know who won that election for several days. But this was a very decisive victory on Charles Booker's part. He had a huge turnout in the urban areas, in the Golden Triangle. And surprisingly, a lot of local progressives in this area and in the rural areas turned out very heavily and cut into McGrath's lead in those places. And I mean, he carried McCracken County, he carried Christian County, and he had the momentum behind him. Even though McGrath did try to make a final push toward the end by making an online presence and a television presence, it was not enough. This was Charles Booker's election to lose.
All right, let's move now to another race here in Kentucky. We're getting a lot of national attention for some of these races. Of course, this is the one for Kentucky District 4, the incumbent Congressman Thomas Massie, and a challenger, Ed Gallrein, who was endorsed by the president. And to the surprise of many, Massie lost.
Well, yes, that was a race that everyone was watching. Of course, Congressman Massie had been a major Trump supporter. He supported the president on a lot of his legislation, but as of late, he became a Trump critic. He criticized the president on the Epstein files, on the Big Beautiful Bill, and then the war. And so that is when Thomas Massie ended up in the president's crosshairs. And of course, the president endorsed Ed Gallrein, and the Secretary of War, Secretary of Defense, came in. It's very odd for a defense secretary to do. Came into the district a few days ago. Huge rally for Ed Gallrein, and this is when the momentum for Gallrein really took off. And as I said earlier, the president has star power within his party. We saw this past Saturday when Bill Cassidy lost the nomination in Louisiana to an upstart, to someone that the president supported. And of course, Thomas Massie went down tonight. And of course, if I were John Cornyn in Texas, if I were Lauren Boebert in Colorado, I would be shaking in my boots. The president has clearly taken command of his party, and he has set the tone for his side of the aisle going forward into the fall.
And Kentucky's not alone. I mean, there's some primaries in other states this has happened where the longtime incumbents have been beaten by candidates backed by President Trump. What are the national indications moving forward for the general on that?
Republicans who are going to run for any kind of office at the national level or even maybe the state level had better toe the president's line. I mean, you, I don't mean to mix apples and rocks, but think about Lyndon Johnson and the type of power that he had as the leader of the United States Senate and the way that he was able to use persuasion, threats, cajoling, and threatening to upend people's committee seats and assignments and their possible reelection. We're seeing the same thing replicated at a national level with President Trump. You cross President Trump, you get on his bad side, he tweets about you, your career is over. And so going forward, I know the president will be considered a lame duck here in the next couple of years, but he has a huge following. The MAGA base has totally co-opted the Republican Party. This is not the Republican Party of 40 years ago or even 20 years ago. It's totally changed.
One more question about national level and state level stuff, and then we'll move to local. You know, the New York Times reported that the primary race involving Representative Massie and Mr. Galrine was around $33 million, one of the most expensive primary races in a long time. Read the tea leaves for me on what that means for November's midterms for races nationwide.
Politics is expensive, and money is the mother's milk of politics. It always has been, it always will be in terms of getting airtime, in terms of being able to be competitive, to pay staffers. Certainly, when we're talking about internet presence, visibility, if you do not have the money, if you cannot raise those funds, you're not going to do particularly well. And coming back to what we said about the Senate race, that's another challenge that Charles Booker has. He has got to raise some serious money because I guarantee you, Andy Barr will have the full weight of the Republican establishment and Republican donors right behind it. Charles Booker has to have that same momentum. You may have great ideas, you may be articulate, you may look good on paper, but if you don't have those greenbacks behind, if you do not have a sizable war chest, you can't expect to do very well.
All right, let's move more to local. 3 items. Let's start in Mayfield, where longtime Mayor Kathy Onan is out. Do you think that that's a referendum on her plan to rebuild Mayfield following the tornado?
Yeah, apparently Mayfield voters were not too terribly pleased by her handling of the rebuilding process. Granted, the tornado that swept through this area devastated Mayfield terribly some 5 years ago. And apparently, voters didn't think she was moving fast enough. And so the Tim Shote Derek Parrott race is going to be an interesting one as well because they were major critics of her, and they're both talking about ways to move Mayfield forward. And apparently, that resonated with Mayfield voters. Now, what's interesting about this race is it's historic. You have an African American candidate who's a serious, viable candidate. I believe he was the top vote getter tonight. That's important and that's historic. You have another gentleman who's a little bit older. Tim Schultz is very older. He as an engineer. He's good at problem solving. And so this is going to be a close race to watch. And the one thing that you're going to hear both candidates focus in on is economic development. And those issues tend to resonate well with voters.
Yes, that's right. Tim Choate and Derek Parrott will now move on to the general there in November. Let's talk about the big talker around here, particularly McCracken County, is the Republican primary for McCracken County Judge Executive. Matt Moore and Richard Abraham falling pretty significantly to incumbent Craig Clymer. Clymer he sweeps up big in this race and faces independent George Bray, who is currently serving as Paducah mayor. Before we get to the Clymer-Bray showdown, let's talk about this race where Moore really did a lot of attacking on the incumbent Clymer, and once again Richard Abraham just couldn't get across the finish line. What do you make of that race?
Well, incumbency helps. And Judge Clymer is a known quantity within the area. Those attacks on Judge Clymer fell short. Sometimes negative campaigning doesn't work too terribly well, can backfire. And so this is one of the things that gave Judge Clymer the advantage to win that primary for sure.
I think it's safe to say that Craig Clymer was a bit perturbed that George Bray, at the last minute, filed as an independent in the race. He's said as much. So now those two will face off. Any predictions or advice for those candidates moving forward in the context that, I mean, both men want to tout these huge economic development projects that are happening in Paducah-McCracken County?
I'm calling this race the Clash of the Titans. In this sense, you have the incumbent mayor of Paducah, who's a known quantity, the incumbent county judge executive of McCracken County, who's a known quantity. Both of these men have records. They're going to run on their records. They're going to attack each other's records. And so this election could be very, very, very testing. So look forward to a lot of good zingers that you're going to hear on the campaign as these two men trade barbs with each other during the campaign and the debates that follow.
All right, Dr. Brian Clardy, thank you for sharing your time and your perspective with us as the Kentucky primary is now behind us and in the books. I know we'll be talking with you throughout the course of the next several months and certainly as the November election nears. So thank you very much, sir. Appreciate your time.
Well, thank you for having me.
Special thanks to Dr. Clardy for taking the time to join us. If you like hearing his insight, go back and listen to our previous episode on the MAGA split, why there's been friction between Kentucky Republicans and the president. The Crossroads Suncast will be back again soon.